Hello and welcome to the podcast Emotional Intelligence, your greatest asset and key to success. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Carlaccio, coming to you from the Greater New Haven, Connecticut area. As a positive intelligence or PQ coach, I'm committed to helping people develop both emotional intelligence and mental fitness. That is, you'll come to regard problems as situations that help you learn and grow. PQ is a way of being and doing in the world that enables you to develop and sustain a positive relationship with yourself and others, at home, at work, and everywhere in between. Please subscribe to this podcast and tap the like button so more people can enjoy the benefits of PQ. And now, here's the show. Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. And the topic today is forgiveness. This is episode 15 of Emotional Intelligence, your greatest asset and key to success. And I promise you a very good episode today with my guest, Alicia McLain. She is a coach and many other things. So welcome, Alicia. And how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you.
Excellent. I am going to read a little bit about Alicia to give you a chance to get to know her a little bit, and then we'll get right on into the show. She is a certified professional coach, public speaker, trainer, and entrepreneur. She's an organizational transformation and leadership coach with over 20 years of experience within the software development and IT domains. And as an agility coach, her expertise is in the change management aspects of agile transformation. She coaches, trains, and transforms mid-size to large companies, both domestically and internationally. She rocks. She, known as the organizational whisperer, Alicia has focused on using coaching to build agility and accountability in organizations and on teams. She has a keen sense of connecting individuals to their purpose and helping them to build leadership, agility, and resilience to tackle the challenges of their daily work. Her work helps her clients increase their positive intelligence and mental fitness to meet the demands of their lives. She holds a bachelor's degree in information systems and a minor in Spanish from San Diego State University and a master's degree in organizational leadership from Chapman University. She and her wife are nomads. They live in their 44-foot RV and they travel the U.S. and that sounds like so much fun. Except you have very little closet space, right?
Yeah, zero.
Yeah. And she enjoys hiking in national parks, exploring new cities, as well as home crafts and colored pencil art. And welcome again. And yeah, it's so exciting. So let's get right into the topic. Forgiveness is a tough thing. I know for my own experience, having lived through a lot of trauma, a lot of childhood trauma, and even not childhood trauma, that forgiving the people who have done things to me has been the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Absolutely the hardest thing, because when a long time ago, I don't think this way anymore, but a long time ago, I thought that if you forgave, that meant you also had to forget, and I couldn't forget. So I thought, well, I can't forget it, so I can't forgive it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really great point and a great and very vulnerable example. You know, what comes up for me around forgiveness is about setting myself free. You know, but this is not something that we learn really early on in our life, right? We don't even probably get to this concept until later in life, and to know that it's not about forgetting. It's about setting yourself free of the damaging negative emotion that we can carry from not being able to forgive. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you're familiar with this book, The Body Keeps Score, but you know,
of course.
Yeah, The Body Keeps Score, right?
By Bessel van der Kolk, for those of you, and I'll put that in the notes. Yes,
that's great. Yeah, I'm glad you can say his name. And so, I mean, that the body keeps score, right? And if we hold on to the negative emotion, all we're really doing is creating our own suffering and having and basically damaging our own health potentially. And so I really do see it as setting ourselves free. And it was interesting because I think it was at the start of this year, I did this post on forgiveness and gratitude. I had these two
Mm,
stones, one said forgiveness,
mm-hmm,
one said gratitude.
mm-hmm.
And it'd be interesting, I think, to explore how these two things can go together. It almost sounds like there is some gratitude even in what you described.
Well, we're actually going to do gratitude next week.
That's great. Boy, what a great
Yeah,
follow-up topic.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So I
I don't
want to
know.
go
I
back
see
to,
them.
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I kind of see them as related,
Mm-hmm,
in a way. How do we, and maybe it's just the gift of being free, the
mm-hmm.
gratitude about being free as it relates to forgiveness. I'm sorry, I didn't mean
Yeah.
to interrupt.
No, no, that's okay. That's important, and I want to take a moment to extend that thought. But first, I want to say, um, play devil's advocate. How is not forgiving or holding the trauma in my body my fault or my problem? And how is that? Because I think people might say, I didn't I didn't produce the trauma. And again, the definition of trauma isn't what happened. It's that what happened to you was not borne witness to by somebody with empathy and love for you.
Yeah. That's a great question. And so the first thing that came up for me about, holding on to negative emotion or
Mm-hmm.
trauma, and I'm no expert in trauma, so I'm not a
Mm-hmm.
therapist and I don't have any expertise in trauma, but what I do know is that the first thing that comes up for me is that it's not about fault, right? It's not anybody's
Mm-hmm.
fault about holding on to the trauma.
Right.
It's really about, um, being able to because I actually just had a thought the other day about a memory that came up for me,
Mm-hmm.
and I realized that in that moment I forgave myself,
Mm-hmm.
about something that happened when I was 12.
Oh
So
yeah.
these things can come, but this is also an act of freeing. It's an act of love and it's an act of freeing. So there's no
Mm-hmm.
fault in it. I think
Mm-hmm.
part of the thing that has us holding on to the negative emotion is the fact that we do think that there is some fault or some blame somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
and what comes up for me is Pema Chodron's book on
Oh.
becoming ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's about not having that attachment. Whatever the
Mm-hmm.
circumstance, it is. The
Mm-hmm.
circumstance is. And if
Mm-hmm.
we can separate ourselves from that attachment to it and from our sometimes we can be attached to our own negative emotion around it,
Oh,
right?
for
we
sure.
we can identify with the
Mm-hmm.
negative emotion in such a way that it becomes who we are. We make ourselves part of that negative emotion. And so I think there's an opportunity there to free ourselves. Yeah, no
Yeah.
fault, no blame, just freedom.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time blaming, and I've spent a lot of time finding fault with certain
Hmm.
people in my life, my
Yep.
parents
Yep.
and other people who I won't name.
Yeah.
And what happened is the trauma was stored in my body and it came
Right.
out as migraine headaches.
Right.
And so from the time I was 6, I was getting headaches and I was going to doctors. I was staying home from school and nobody could figure out why I was having headaches. And it didn't until I did trauma therapy. Then it's like, oh, that's where the migraines are coming from. They
Right.
manifested, in my brain. And so doctor after neurologist would just give me pills and this and that.
Big pharma.
And yeah, exactly. Now I have to say though, I do still get migraines, not as frequently, and I have to take a shot every month.
Hmm.
And when the pain comes on and it's acute, I have to take something
Yeah.
because I can't function.
Sure.
But now I understand why why those headaches and migraines came on. But
Yeah.
I want to go back to this idea of freedom. I held on to all of that and I blamed myself and I kept, so I internalized a lot of it. And then that led to my lack of self worth and my lack of self confidence. And so the blame shame thing was going back and forth. And I got caught in that trap and it was a
Yeah.
prison.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
yep, yep.
Absolutely.
And so
Yep.
when you mentioned Pema Chodron, The Buddhist nun, for those of you who don't know who she is, and I'll also put that in the show notes because
It's a
she
great
is a
book.
gem and
She
she
is.
speaks like us. She's
Yeah,
not
she
high,
does. Yes, she does.
right? She talks like a regular person.
Regular schmegula. Yep.
Yep, yep,
Yeah.
and she just
I
says,
appreciate that about her.
right, and that non-attachment, and nobody says
Yes.
that is easy, but
No,
that's where
no.
like meditation comes in, and I
Right.
learned look at it like a movie, and you don't need to be in the movie. You can be looking at the
Exactly.
movie. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I'll tell you, it's so interesting how, all the stuff that you learn at different points along your life, I was watching, so I do this, one of my tools in my toolkit is called points of view. I don't know if you're familiar with that concept or not. It's a coaching tool
Mm-hmm.
basically, and it's based on phototherapy, and it's having people look at photos and words to use both sides of their brains to solve their problems. And in a recent session that I attended on observation, she made the analogy of how our mind is like a recycling bin on a computer, and it just keeps
Oh,
collecting and collecting and collecting and
that's
collecting and collecting and collecting and
it needs
collecting
to
and
dump.
right. And you need to empty the recycling bin, right? We need to empty the because it slows us down. Just like basically, it's like saboteur mind chatter
Mm-hmm,
slows us
mm-hmm,
down,
mm-hmm.
and so even memories around, I mean, we can't always erase our memories, but we can look at how we hold on to the negative emotion
Yep.
around them. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
again, it's like when we've been talking about hanging on and clinging to, and that is actually where that letting go comes in,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
letting go can sound like a cliche, but it is perhaps the only way to move past it.
It absolutely is. It
Yeah.
is the only way. And I really realized that in listening to her book on becoming ourselves. It's
Mm-hmm,
about this
mm-hmm,
idea of detaching, from the or just not having an attachment to the outcome. We
mm-hmm,
learn this in the positive intelligence work as
mm-hmm,
well. When we
mm-hmm.
look at, key areas of coaching around and I'll use a specific one, the hyperachiever. It's about not
Yeah.
being
Oh
attached
my
to the
gosh.
outcome, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I am. I'm a hyperachiever, and it is almost pathological for me. I have like 3 graduate degrees, and I have a ton of certifications, and I keep
Yeah.
thinking I need one more, I need one more.
Yeah. All the trophies
And
under the arm and grabbing
oh
for the
my
next one.
gosh, I know. And the funny thing is though, I have never once hung a degree on a wall. I have
Ah,
never hung a degree or certification on a wall. They're all sitting on the floor in my closet. And people are
yeah.
like, why don't you hang them up? And I'm like, I don't know. It
Yeah.
just feels
Yeah.
weird. So it's kind of a strange thing. But going back again to that emotion and holding on, a lot of people, when they experience trauma, that's the only thing they know, and that's the
Yeah.
emotion that's familiar, or emotions. And even though they're negative and bad for us, and they produce stress and all kinds of other illnesses, that's what we know. And in Adult Children of Alcoholics, they call it the inner drugstore. And it isn't that
I
it's
could see
a
that.
drug, but there's an
Yeah.
addiction to the
Yep.
pain, and there's an
Yep.
addiction to that. And so even moving out of that
hmm
sounds
It's
scary.
like
Like,
rehab, or it's like detox, or like,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
hmm
yeah.
yeah,
I totally get that, and in the sphere and in the realm of folks that I work with, part of the biggest thing that um, they're all learning at this different stage in their life is about naming the emotion.
hmm
When you name the emotion, it almost takes the air out of it, especially if it's a
hmm
raging negative emotion. If I could just name that and
hmm
then have that interrupt, right? What's that positive intelligence or PQ rep, that
hmm
mindfulness practice that helps me interrupt and slow the action down so that I can, I'm sorry, I've got allergies.
So do I.
It's
I
allergy
sniff all the
season.
time. Yeah.
um, yeah, I mean, how do I interrupt? How do I slow the action down? And how do I create some space for myself between
hmm
the stimulus and response? This kind of brings to mind for me Man's Search for Meaning,
Oh yeah, Viktor
Viktor
Frankl.
Frankl, right? About this idea that, no matter what happens, I still have my mind and I have my ability to choose, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And my choice to love. Because
Right.
once
Yeah.
you have the love, that's the
Yeah.
one thing the Nazis couldn't take away.
That's exactly right.
And he
That's
held on to
exactly
that
right.
love.
Yeah.
And so, for those of you who don't know, Viktor Frankl was in a concentration camp. He was
Yeah.
terribly abused and he was a survivor.
Yeah.
And the thing that helped him survive was to think about his wife and to think
Yep.
about love.
Yeah.
And that kept him
Stunning.
going. And it's probably one of the hardest things to forgive.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you
Absolutely.
know, I would say in the United States, one of the hardest things is the legacy of slavery.
Yep.
And even though even in the continuance of that,
Right.
with white on black
Current
violence,
day.
black on,
Yep.
yes, all of that,
Yep.
and so that's difficult too. But the idea is when we let go, we have to begin to refamiliarize ourselves.
Yeah.
And so when I'm feeling okay, the hypervigilant person says the other shoe's going to drop.
Yeah.
And guess what? Maybe it won't.
Hmm.
Maybe there's joy, and maybe you get to have that joy. It's yours.
Yeah.
That joy belongs to you.
Yeah.
And the happiness, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Gosh, that example of the legacy of slavery in the United States. I'm so glad you brought that up because to me that is another one of those quintessential examples of resilience and forgiveness. Because
Mm-hmm,
honestly, if you can't forgive and let yourself go, let that go,
mm-hmm.
then you really can't stand in your power, right? And so how do people continue to live and build families and communities and in the face of all that comes with not just the legacy of slavery, but what happens today on a day-to-day basis with,
Mm-hmm.
the current flavor of that kind of thing today. It's about resilience, it's about forgiveness, and it's
And
about gratitude.
it is. I will tell you, I am a scholar of Black women's history. I didn't tell you that yesterday, but one of the things, and I did mention this last week, is I curated a collection of essays on Black women activists, spiritual
Mm,
Black women activists, and they endured a lot of pain and suffering, but they also persisted. They were
hmm.
resilient. They
Right.
made inroads in social justice, racial justice,
That's exactly right.
feminism, despite the odds against them.
That's exactly right.
And so they're testament to the resilience of Black women and the Black community in general. And it continues. I did a kind of a research project on the Black female bishops in the Episcopal Church, and I
Oh,
interviewed all 12 of them. There are only 12,
wow.
and to every single one of them was related to me the instances where they had been racially attacked in
Hmm.
some way, in some terrible way.
Oh
And
yeah.
this one person who's really famous, Kelly Brown Douglas, she's not a bishop, but I interviewed her because she's very well known, written lots of books, and is outspoken. And I said, because I admire her so much. She's alive and she's like dean of the Washington Cathedral, and she was the head of the Episcopal Divinity School that used to be housed at Union Theological Seminary. And I said, so do you experience racism anymore? And she laughed. And I was so embarrassed. I thought, what a dumb question for a white person to ask. I mean, it was like
Oh, you were
it was,
curious.
I was, but it didn't dawn on me that someone famous and awesome and smart and talented, I just thought everyone would respect her. And she just laughed at me and she said, every single day. She said, every single day. And she said, microaggressions are not micro to us.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and this kind of goes circles right back to this concept of forgiveness, right? And
Mm-hmm,
and being attached,
mm-hmm,
right? I think part of this is recognizing that whatever someone has just said, and this takes a high degree of mental fitness, but realizing that whatever someone just said is about the battle going on in their head and so little to do with you. I mean, you're the person standing in front of them, but there's a war going on in their head. And that's actually been a direction I'd love to be able to take my work, is to help people, from BIPOC communities, really
Mm-hmm.
to understand how to use mental fitness and positive intelligence to lean into the forgiveness and resilience. You can't change all the stuff that's out there. You can't change what somebody's about to
Mm-mm.
say that's going to be
Mm-mm.
horrifying or offensive. You can't change that, but you can change how attached you are to it, and you can choose love. Right. But
Yes.
it does take that mental fitness to be able to do that. It does take that. And so I'm just, looking forward to the day that I can really lean into that work and make this a toolkit for people in BIPOC communities.
Yes. I will send you the introduction to my book because it's all about love.
Awesome.
And I talk
That's
about
great.
love. And
Yeah.
the last chapter of the book on Patrice Cullors is called Love Wins and Black Lives
I just
Matter.
heard about Patrice Cullors. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Nice.
I know all
Wow.
about it. I'll send it to you. She does work on the Prison Industrial Complex. I gave a
Yeah.
sermon, my senior sermon. I went to Berkeley Divinity School at Yale, and my senior sermon happened to be when the reading was on one of the 12 apostles said, Jesus, how many times do I have to forgive my brother? Is it 7 times? And Jesus said, no, it's 70 times 7. And he's
Yeah.
like, oh my
As many
gosh, are you
times as
serious?
necessary.
Yeah. And so I had to, and it was right after the George Floyd thing. And I was talking about forgiveness and reconciliation. And it was about not having, you don't forget, you were
Yeah.
harmed, but
Right.
without being, you can't move on.
That's so true. Yeah.
Yeah. And
The
Toni Morris,
inability to forgive is like putting weights on your own feet, right?
yes.
Yeah. Not being able to empty that recycling bin to free up that space so that you can move more freely and more quickly,
Yeah.
into the things that matter for you in your life.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's a
Yeah. In
great
fact,
topic.
it is. And I just remembered, I'm trying to see what time it is. Somebody read a poem. I did a silent retreat in January, and the very first thing we did was pick up a rock and write down what we wanted to let go of
Oh, yeah.
for that weekend.
Yeah.
And so I put my rock back on the table and I left it there until Sunday. And I had a spiritual direction session with somebody, and there was a poem about letting go. And one of the pieces of the poem was, until you let go, that thing is occupying a space in your heart or even your gut.
Yeah.
And then there's no room for God to enter,
Yeah.
or the spirit, or whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it, your inner
Yeah.
sage, to do the
Yeah.
work that the inner sage does.
That's right.
And so this is an opportunity, practicing positive intelligence, to practice empathy on
Mm.
ourselves and others,
Yeah.
and to explore what's going on with me, what's going on with them, what's the
Hmm.
environment, and then innovate. How can I move a different direction?
Yeah.
And what would my older self say to my younger self?
That's right.
What would my 80-year-old self say to the 50-year-old self?
Yeah.
And then to make those changes, to activate. And I want to
Absolutely.
just share an anecdote. My I had a very difficult childhood, and my parents were alcoholics, and they spent a lot of time at the tavern. Like, I was alone and figuring out which TV dinner I wanted to eat when I was 8 years old.
Hmm.
And so I never forgave my parents for basically leaving me alone to fend for myself. And it took a very long time. And my stepmother died of a very horrible death due to alcoholism. And my father died, I don't know, 20 years later, something, long time later, 15 years later. And he didn't die of alcoholism. He died of other things, but it was sad because they were buried in what's called a piggyback grave. So she was
Mm.
buried first, and then his coffin went on top of
On top.
hers,
Yeah. Okay. Hmm.
and I couldn't visit the grave.
Mm.
So aside from burying my father in 2004, I never went back to the cemetery
Mm-hmm.
because I couldn't forgive my stepmother. And a few years ago, I was back in Spokane, where I grew up, Spokane, Washington, and something happened, something clicked and said, you know what? What were they going through?
Yeah.
Right? What was going on in their lives? It wasn't like they said, I'm just gonna grow up and be an
Yeah.
alcoholic. Nobody
Yeah.
does that,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Nobody says that.
Yeah,
Said no one
nobody.
ever.
Yeah, in first grade, what do you want to be when you
I want to be an
grow
alcoholic.
up? Yeah,
Can't wait.
right.
Yeah. No,
So
there's
I
a
went.
lot of suffering, right? And just
Mhm.
recognizing that we all have our suffering and
Yep.
what was going on for them at that time.
Yeah, and so I went to the grave, and I said, I don't know what happened to you, but something really must have happened that hurt you,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
forgive you. And then I
Yeah.
was able to just shoot, let it go.
Yeah. Wow. What a powerful example of freeing yourself, and I really wish people were able to have these kinds of messages earlier in life because we carry
Hmm.
so much, negative emotion around things like this that,
Yeah.
um, and what is it, what is it, how does it shape our way forward, right? We can look back at things that have happened in the past and then say, what, you know, because of this situation, what has changed for me, or how do I see myself today, or,
Hmm.
I don't know. I think there's ways to, in everything, as we are taught that there's a gift and opportunity, right? A gift of knowledge, gift of power, or a gift of inspiration. What were we inspired to do as a result of whatever the thing
Yes.
was?
That is
Yeah.
exactly right. I remember that was one of the things I wanted to draw out because you said it earlier on, the gratitude thing.
Yes.
So, no, I'm not grateful
No.
for the things
Nope.
I underwent. However,
Yeah.
I'm grateful because they made me the person I am today.
Today. That's right.
And
Yep.
that is why the podcast is here. That is why I became a positive intelligence coach. That
That's
is why
right.
I'm also a substance abuse disorder recovery coach,
Yep.
because those are, and a spiritual director. And should I name
That's
the other
it.
ones? I'm just kidding. Um,
Go for the list.
yeah,
These are
but
all the things, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and those are the things that I find that I'm compelled to do. I've been called to do them,
That's right.
and I wouldn't be doing them
That's
if,
right. Absolutely.
I wouldn't.
Yeah.
And then, Spirit told me, go help women. And I'm like, okay,
That's my
whatever,
mission.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was
Yeah.
like, what are you doing? Why can't I find a job? And yeah, and
Yeah.
so, yeah. So it is
Amazing.
a gift. And
Yeah.
the gift is really, like you say, it's in that freedom.
It is the freedom. It's just stunning. And it's interesting because I imagine that when you were at the grave and you told your stepmother that you forgave her, there had to have just been this physical feeling of just release and freedom.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's just really stunning, how powerful that can be. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And somebody said once that I heard, and that probably was the catalyst. I didn't think about the trauma my dad went through. My
Mm-hmm.
dad was abused as a child by a very violent alcoholic father, my grandfather,
Mm,
and he then went into World War II,
mm.
and he was a sailor, he was in the Navy, and his ship was torpedoed by a kamikaze pilot.
Oh, wow.
And so lots of people died,
Yeah.
and
Trauma.
he was one of the survivors, and he he said they were in the water with blood and sharks, and
Yeah.
they could find, pieces of scalp
Yeah.
of the kamikaze pilot. And then he went through life. He never complained. He never would speak about this giant scar on his face that I know was not a cut when he was shaving.
Right. Yeah.
And my mother died when I was an infant. So he was a widower with 4 kids.
Mm.
And he never once blamed his circumstances, but he suffered. And in that
Yeah.
suffering and in that trauma that he wasn't able to process, he made different kinds of decisions.
Choices. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What really comes to mind for me is back to what we were saying earlier about being in the prison of your own thinking.
Hmm.
And I mean, what's the difference, right? If you're in the prison of your own mind and you're trapped in
Yes.
your own thinking and you're in physical, logical, prison. I mean, what's the
Uh-huh.
difference, right? You're not
Yeah.
free, right? And so
Right.
mental fitness is that way that we build the muscle to free ourselves of the prison of our own thinking. We all
Mm-hmm.
have it, and we
Mm-hmm.
all make choices, and we all behave from it. And
Mm-hmm.
how does this impact people around us, whether it's work, whether it's home? And so, yeah, just really a stunning example of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah.
I know that I didn't realize too. I do a lot of research on quantum physics now, and I'm really into thinking about how energy operates.
Mm-hmm.
And when I thought I was my trauma, I
Mm-hmm.
behaved in crazy ways that people are
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, TMI, Jamie.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I want to be around you. And I kept thinking, what's wrong? What's going on? And then
Sure.
I learned that this energy that I was putting out
Yeah,
was not positive energy.
sure. Yeah. The mirror neurons. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting.
So I'm going to close our time together here with a really important poem by George Romish, and it was in a Dear Abby column, and I read
Mm-hmm.
it as a kid, and it stuck with me all my life. So
Mm-hmm.
literally for 45 years or so, I don't even remember, I don't want to say, but I remember this column. So I went researching it and I found it in an old newspaper. And so I want to read it because, and I'll share this also in the show notes. It's super powerful and beautiful. So here it is. It's called Forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Forgiveness is the wind-blown bud which blooms in placid beauty at Verdun. Forgiveness is the tiny slate gray sparrow which has built its nest of twigs and string among the shards of glass upon the wall of shame.
Mm-hmm.
Forgiveness is the child who laughs in merry ecstasy beneath the toothed fence that closes in Danang. Forgiveness is the fragrance of the violet, which still clings fast to the heel that crushed it.
Mm-hmm.
Forgiveness is the broken dream which hides itself in the corner of the mind oft called forgetfulness, so that it will not bring pain to the dreamer. Forgiveness is the reed that stands up straight and green when nature's mighty rampage halts, full spent. Forgiveness is a God who will not leave us after all we've done.
Mm. That's a good one.
I know. And so,
Yeah.
just so you know, people watching or listening, part of this was attributed to Mark Twain. Mark Twain did not write it, he did not, but people have quoted it, and then they have attributed the people who have quoted it to them. It's George Romish. And again, I'll put the information in the show notes
Yeah.
because I want to share that poem. It's so powerful.
It's very powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for
So,
that.
yeah. And do you have any parting thoughts of wisdom, my darling?
You know, the poem, I'm still sort of living in that poem. I just really appreciate it. I think if there's a parting thought, it really takes us back to the freedom that we give ourselves when we're able to forgive, and how in doing that we stand in our power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. We stand in our power.
Yeah.
And so a reed is flimsy, right?
Hmm.
It's flimsy, but they don't break because they're
Yeah.
flimsy, right? The
Yeah.
wind can, you can't even pull a reed. You can't even pull it. It won't
Yeah.
break.
That's
It won't
right.
break. So reeds are great.
Yeah.
Reeds are great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Well, thank you
thank
for the
you.
opportunity. Yeah, thank you. This was great. I'm glad to be able to have been with you on this topic today. It's so important to have this conversation about forgiveness.
It is. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Alicia's information will be in the show notes.
Yep.
And until next time, I will see all of you at the PQ Gym. And if you want to find out what it's like to work with a positive intelligence coach and transform your life, come and talk to me. All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye bye.